Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey all the way back to the Middle Ages to look at one of Geoffrey Chaucer's most compelling stories from the Canterbury Tales. It's called The Franklin's Tale, and honestly, I absolutely love unpacking this one with you guys because it isn't just a simple story. It's actually a giant, complex, medieval moral puzzle. On the surface, yeah, it's a tale of knights and ladies and magic, but right underneath all of that, it profoundly grapples with these massive, heavy themes like providence, the nature of truth, human relationships, and this really specific medieval concept called gentillesse, which basically means a sort of noble generosity of spirit. It's a story that asks us, point blank, what it truly means to be an honorable person.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here are the core elements of the puzzle we're going to unravel today. We've got a loyal wife, a desperate suitor, a deeply conflicted husband, and a staggering 1,000-pound debt. 600 years ago, Chaucer set up this exact scenario to end with what they called a demande d'amour, basically a juicy question of love and ethics for his audience to sit around and debate. So for this explainer, I want you to literally put yourselves directly in the shoes of a judge. As we walk through the facts of this medieval case, keep this one single question in the back of your mind. Out of all these characters we're about to meet, who acts the most generously? Now, to really get this story, we first have to understand the guy telling it. The storyteller is the Franklin. In medieval society, a Franklin was a free man. He wasn't a serf tied down to the land, but crucially, and this is super important, he didn't hold noble status either. He was, well, let's call him somewhere right in the middle. What's completely fascinating about his placement in the Canterbury Tales is that he actually interrupts another pilgrim, the squire, just to tell his story. Scholars often point out that this interruption, along with the specific tale he chooses to tell, really highlights his own feelings of inferior social status. Because he lacks a fancy title, he is deeply, almost obsessively interested in gentillesse. It's like he's kind of overcompensating, wanting to prove everyone that true nobility comes from your character and how honorably you behave, not just from having a wealthy bloodline. So that brings us to the central couple of the Franklin's story, a knight named Arviragus and his wife Dorigen. Now, they establish what is a highly complex and, frankly, for the time period, a very unusual marriage pact. Behind closed doors, in absolute secret, they agree that their marriage is going to be a strict, equal partnership. Neither one is going to rule over the other, which is pretty progressive, right? However, they also agree that out in public, Arviragus will always appear to have the overall authority. Why? Well, simply to preserve his high status as a tough, respected knight in the eyes of their society. So it's this incredibly delicate balancing act between their private equality and their public perception. Let's move to Brittany and see how this builds, because how does this idyllic little setup turn into a massive conflict? Shortly after they get married, Arviragus travels away to Britain to win honor and fame in battle, and he leaves Dorigen all alone in Brittany, France. She misses him terribly, but more than that, she becomes absolutely paralyzingly terrified of the jagged, black coastal rocks of Brittany. She just obsessively fears that these treacherous rocks are going to wreck her husband's ship when he finally sails home. Enter our third character, a squire named Aurelius. Now, Aurelius is hopelessly in love with Dorigen, and he courts her completely against her will. Finally, literally just to get rid of the guy, she makes a really rash promise in what she thinks is a lighthearted mood. She tells Aurelius she will give him her love, but only if he can do the impossible, make all those terrifying black rocks disappear from the entire coast. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the dilemma is the sheer, unbelievable scale of the financial stakes involved. Aurelius is desperate. He wants to fulfill this impossible task, so he tracks down a scholar magician who is versed in the arcane arts. The magician takes pity on this lovesick young man, but hey, his magic certainly isn't free. He agrees to make the rocks disappear for a week or two, but he demands the princely sum of 1,000 pounds. To put that into perspective, in medieval terms, this is an astronomical, utterly life-ruining amount of money. I mean, imagine taking out a massive mortgage just to impress a crush. But Aurelius agrees. He locks himself into this crushing debt, all for the slim chance to win Dorigen. So the magician does his thing, and boom! Suddenly, the rocks vanish. Aurelius runs straight to Dorigen and demands she fulfill her end of the bargain. And Dorigen, she is completely horrified. She is plunged into this deep moral crisis, even crying and listing off legendary women from history who committed suicide just to maintain their honor. But by this time, Arviragus has safely returned home. A devastated Dorigen tearfully confesses exactly what she's done. And Arviragus's reaction? This is the pivot point of the entire tale. He calmly, coolly tells her that she absolutely must go to Aurelius and keep her promise. He declares, truth is the highest thing that man may keep. Basically, he values the keeping of a sworn oath above absolutely everything else, commanding her to honor it, even of pain of death.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Chaucer really took this concept and made the story entirely his own. Because, fun fact, Chaucer didn't invent this plot from scratch. He actually based it on two closely related stories by the Italian writer Boccaccio. But look at the difference. In Boccaccio's original versions, the magic involves literal fairies creating a blooming Maytime garden in the dead of winter. You know, very traditional, whimsical fairy tale stuff. But Chaucer radically alters this. He sets his version in Brittany and totally replaces that supernatural fairy magic with learned academic magic. The impossible feat isn't some cute magical garden anymore, it's university-trained clerks manipulating complex astronomy to make perilous coastal rocks vanish. And here's the craziest part. Chaucer grounded this so-called magic in real, hard medieval science. Chaucer was actually quite the science nerd himself. He even wrote a detailed instructional book on the astrolabe for his son. As modern researchers Olson, Laird, and Litley discovered, there is very likely real astronomical history behind these vanishing rocks. On December 19, 1340, there was a highly rare linear alignment of the Earth, Moon, and Sun right when the Sun and Moon were at their closest possible distance to Earth. This highly specific configuration caused massive, exceptionally high tides. Those tides would have completely submerged and hidden the black rocks of Brittany. So the magician's grand trick in the story? It's likely based on precise, predictable, real-world astronomical calculations. Anyway, getting back to our narrative climax, Dorigen presents herself to Aurelius. She's completely distraught, but she's ready to fulfill her terrible vow simply because her husband commanded her to keep her truth. But seeing her profound distress and, frankly, deeply moved by Arviragus' strict, painful adherence to his oath, Aurelius does the unexpected. He releases Dorigen from her promise. He just lets her go. But wait, Aurelius still owes that scholar-magician 1,000 pounds. So he goes to the magician and explains the whole crazy situation, how Arviragus sacrificed his marriage for truth, and how Aurelius then sacrificed his own desire out of honor. Hearing this, the magician is so deeply moved by their nobility that he cancels Aurelius's enormous debt on the spot, claiming his hospitality was payment enough. It's this beautiful, cascading chain of generosity, like a giant game of moral dominoes. But hey, how are we supposed to judge these characters? Let's open up our jury deliberation by looking at how modern scholars interpret Arviragus' actions. Scholar D.W. Robertson takes a highly critical view. Robertson basically argues that Arviragus is not much of a husband. In this specific view, Arviragus' obsession with truth isn't actually virtuous at all. It's entirely about his public image. Robertson points out that Arviragus exerts himself just to impress his lady in the first place. And then when things go terribly wrong, he basically advises her to commit adultery, but heavily insists she keep it super quiet so his own reputation doesn't take a hit. So, the crucial point is, do we accept that cynical view, or is there another way to read him? We contrast Robertson with scholar Muriel Bowden, who strongly defends the knight. Bowden argues that Arviragus honestly, deeply believes that truth really is the highest human principle. From this perspective, he isn't protecting his fragile ego or his image, he is protecting the very fabric of moral integrity. By forcing his wife to keep her word, no matter how excruciatingly painful it is to him personally, he acts as a vere parfait gentile knight, a truly perfect, noble knight who prioritizes universal truth way above his own private happiness. To pull this all together, let's look at how scholar Helen Cooper views the overarching meaning of this entire tale. She notes that the story focuses heavily on moral qualities, things like patience, freedom, and of course, gentillesse. Cooper perfectly summarizes this dynamic, pointing out that a happy ending requires not that God should unmake the rocks, but that a series of individuals should opt to yield up and give rather than take. The disaster is averted not by some divine intervention, and not even ultimately by magic, but by human free will. The puzzle is solved because every single man in this triangle, the husband, the suitor, and the magician, actively chooses generosity over selfishness. Which brings us right back to the exact question Chaucer posed to his medieval audience 600 years ago, and it's the question I am leaving with you today. Which was the most fray? Who acted the most nobly or generously? Was it the husband who sacrificed his love to uphold the supreme value of a promise? Was it the lovesick suitor who gave up his deepest desire out of sheer pity and respect? Or was it the working-class scholar who forgave a life-changing fortune and debt just to match the nobility of the others?
Think about the facts we've explored, weigh the evidence, and decide for yourself, who do you think won this ultimate contest of generosity? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.